The 4th century was consumed by a theological crisis. Across the Roman Empire, bishops and scholars were locked in bitter debates, attempting to mathematically and philosophically define the exact nature of the Christian God. This is the face of the Greco-Roman approach. The imperial church relied heavily on discursive prose and rigid philosophical terminology to settle these debates, seeking to impose the same mathematical order on theology that Rome imposed on its subjects. But look at this panoramic view of ancient ruins along a river. This is the extreme eastern edge of the Roman Empire, the frontier of Mesopotamia. Out here, the local church developed an intellectual framework that operated entirely outside the influence of Roman schools. This region was home to the Syriac-speaking community. Scholars often refer to this tradition as the third lung of early Christianity, breathing in a cultural and linguistic atmosphere distinct from the Greek East and the Latin West. The greatest representative of this tradition was a 4th century deacon named Ephrem the Syrian. Faced with the same theological crises as his Greek counterparts, Ephrem made a radical departure. He completely rejected systematic prose. Instead, he formulated his theology through sung poetry. Ephrem saw poetry as an epistemological necessity. He used it to uphold his theology of wonder rather than adopting the rigid logic of his peers. This ancient stone structure is located in Nisibis, Ephrem's birthplace. The city sat directly on the fault line between the Roman and Persian empires. This silver coin bears the image of a Persian ruler, representing the existential threat Ephrem's community faced. After multiple sieges by Persian forces, Nisibis fell, forcing Ephrem and the Christian population to evacuate westward to the city of Edessa. Amidst this instability, Ephrem embraced the B'nai Qiyamah, or the Sons of the Covenant, a uniquely Syrian form of proto-monastic asceticism. These rocky dwellings visualize the reality of Syriac asceticism. Ephrem lived in absolute poverty, rejecting worldly comforts to dedicate himself entirely to the church. Yet, despite this harsh physical discipline, he was not a solitary hermit isolated in the desert. Ephrem was deeply integrated into urban life, actively teaching, writing, and directing local choirs. Surviving constant geopolitical conflict and practicing strict physical discipline forged a specific mindset in Ephrem. It produced a theology acutely aware of human limitations. We can visualize the central problem of all theology by drawing a boundary. Ephrem viewed reality as divided into two realms: the hidden, infinite divine space above, and the revealed, finite human space below. How does a finite human mind grasp an infinite God? The Hellenistic philosophical approach tried to cross this boundary through force of logic. Ephrem critically termed this method investigation. He argued that investigation is an arrogant overreach. It operates on the sub-rational assumption that a human mind can map, measure, and ultimately contain the divine essence. Ephrem compared this intellectual hubris directly to the fall of Adam. He saw it as an impatient, destructive demand for mastery over knowledge that is intentionally hidden. His solution was an opposing framework, the discipline of wonder. Instead of trying to pierce the boundary, the mind approaches the threshold and stops, engaging with what is revealed without demanding to conquer what is hidden. Rational investigation destroys theology, reducing God to a human concept. Wonder protects theology, halting at the threshold of paradox. If direct investigation is forbidden, a logical question follows. What are the valid sources of revelation? Ephrem pointed to two dual wellsprings, Kiana, the Book of Nature, and Kathava, the Book of Scripture. He believed both of these sources are embedded with Raza, symbols or mysteries intentionally placed there by the Creator to communicate truth. To explain interaction with these symbols, Ephrem used a metal mirror metaphor. In antiquity, mirrors required intense physical friction to stay reflective. He argued that the human heart is this mirror. To clearly perceive the symbols embedded in nature and scripture, the heart must be actively polished to reflect divine beauty. This connects directly back to his lifestyle. Asceticism is the physical and spiritual friction required to polish the mirror, stripping away the grime of sin and distraction. Revelation is therefore not a static data set to be parsed by logic. It requires the synergy of divine symbols and active human effort. When applied to the medium of communication, we can see exactly why systematic prose fails Ephrem's test. Prose forces definitive boundaries. It seeks closure and precise definitions, which inherently triggers the arrogant sin of investigation. This ancient Syriac manuscript shows Ephrem's alternative, the madrash, or isosyllabic choral hymns. These hymns rely mechanically on polarity. They constantly balance opposing concepts against each other, the high against the low, the hidden against the revealed. This polarity prevents resolution. It creates a suspended, liminal space, allowing wonder to operate in the tension between two truths without forcing them into a single definition. The hymns also enforced a communal structure. A primary reader would sing the main stanza, and the entire congregation would answer by singing the refrain. Ephrem's sung poetry functioned as a highly engineered theological mechanism designed to articulate truth while avoiding the trap of rigid definitions. We can test Ephrem's system against the ultimate theological crisis of his era, the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. The council was convened to address Arianism, a movement that threatened the Church by arguing the Son was subordinate to the Father. The Greco-Roman bishops solved this by defining orthodoxy with a hyper-specific, non-biblical Greek term, homoousios, meaning consubstantial. Ephrem was a staunch defender of Nicene orthodoxy. He completely supported the co-equality of the Trinity and wrote extensively against Arian subordination. Yet, in his vast corpus of public hymns defending the Trinity, Ephrem deliberately never uses the term homoousios. He proved that defending orthodox truth did not require adopting the Greek philosophical methodology used by his peers to establish it. Ephrem rejected the term because homoousios is the ultimate weapon of investigation. It attempts to mathematically measure and define the exact essence of the divine. In his hymns on faith, he actively attacks these kinds of precise definitions, calling them presumptuous additions that generate disputes rather than clarity. We can map this strategy visually. Ephrem was aware of the Syriac translations for the term, and he actually accepted them in the narrow container of his academic prose commentaries, but he actively walled these philosophical terms off from his public hymns and the congregation. His motive was entirely pastoral, driven by care for his flock. He refused to let Greek categorization pollute the congregation's posture of wonder. Ephrem's Theology of Wonder proves that recognizing the limits of human cognition is not the defeat of theology. It is the only way to protect the infinite mystery of God from the hubris of the human mind.